Welcome on in everyone, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Today I have a tutorial for you on how to make maps. I have a video over on TikTok that has almost 100,000 views and I have no idea how it got that many, but it's basically me showing you how I prepare my paper in order to make maps like the ones that you see behind me. So I thought I would make a bit of a longer version of that video so I can show you the exact processes and the papers and types of tea that I use and things that I have tried in the past so you can make your own fantasy maps. It is a little bit messy, so if you are more into the digital side of things, then I do have an option for you that do use Procreate on your iPads. So if you wanted to wait around for that segment of the video or you'd like to skip to the chapter, it is down here somewhere if you wanted to find the chapter. But if you would like to stick around for the traditional version, first of all, we need to go make some tea. Okay, now we've made our tea, make sure you let it cool down for a little while before you start handling it. So I'll go through the supplies that you're going to need in order to make your maps. So in the little segment where I was making my tea, you saw that I was using boiling water, but hot water also works. Cold water is not going to bring out as much of the colours, but you can use cold water if you so please. I did use 2 tea bags of English breakfast tea. You can use any black tea that you like. Use a cheap version if you want to, but I do prefer using 2 tea bags in order to get the type of saturation that I personally prefer. And also because I'll be using the tea bags as a paintbrush. So there's no paintbrushes or anything required for this method. You're just going to use the tea bag straight as it is, which is also why you need to make sure that it is fully cooled down if you are using the boiling water method. I do find that that brings out as much saturation as you possibly can get, so I would always prefer using the boiling water. So the next thing that you're going to need, of course, is paper. Now, I have had many questions on what kind of paper that I use, and my preference is watercolor paper. So 300 GSM, cheap watercolor paper. Just go down to your local arts and crafts store and pick up the cheapest one that you can possibly get. It is not necessary to have something that is really good at blending or necessary to have something that's super textured. You just want it to be thick enough that it's going to make these really cool edges, like how you can see in these maps here. So how I have these edges that look like they are nice and ripped and they have layers. That is going to be because you're using the thicker paper with more of those paper fibers in it. You can, of course, use this method on any paper that you like. Back when I was at school, I used to use the tea staining method whenever I had any kind of World War presentation that I had to make, and I had to make letters that were sent from the war back to home, and I used the tea staining method on just regular printer paper. It works just fine. You just have to be a little more gentle with it because it's going to be very, very thin and it's going to be very fragile when it's wet. So if you did want to try that one, you can, but just be aware of those things. Also, it's going to be a lot more crinkly when it dries unless you flatten it under something. So with this method, it's going to be completely flat. The paper is absolutely flat. There's no like warping or no crinkling or anything like that. But with less thick paper, it's going to definitely warp and definitely going to get those crinkles in it, which is also a really cool effect if that's what you were looking for too. Now, I mentioned before that this particular method can get quite messy, so in order to keep your surface dry, you can use a baking tray, but I like to live in chaos and I do it directly on my desk. It doesn't really bother me. I just use a rag to clean things up at the end or soak up a little bit of the excess water that gets on my desk during the process. Another handy tool for this method is a hairdryer if you want to speed things along, but you can, of course, air dry if you want to. I'm just really impatient and I don't want to do that. And of course, you're going to need a pen of some kind. I do like marking my areas of my map down in pencil first, just in case I need to erase something, but I use Micron pens over the top of it to create the fantasy map finished product. So once you've got those things ready and your tea is sufficiently cooled down, then let's get into map making. So as I mentioned before, I'm using 300 GSM watercolor paper, but you can use any paper that you like. You're just going to have a different effect. Make sure you have your tea, a pen, and a rag to clean up any messes on your desk with, and start using your tea bag as a paintbrush. So I've just dipped my tea bag in my tea. It has been steeping for quite some time and it is sufficiently cooled down, and then I start swiping it all over my page. I mentioned earlier that I use 2 tea bags. That is for the extra saturation that it's going to give me. I don't use too much water either. I've filled this glass about halfway full with boiling water and I let it sit for a while, and I'm using each tea bag as a paintbrush, as one of them will break eventually, and that is quite common, so I prefer to have that backup for that reason as well. I just saturate my entire page with the tea bag, and then I get my hairdryer out and I dry it partially. I don't dry it all the way. It is important to leave the edges wet because when you start ripping them, it's going to be a lot easier. You will see in a little bit some of the edges are a little bit too dry and I do have a tough time ripping them, but this one is still quite wet, so I am ripping either in a downwards or an upwards direction. Ripping from side to side can get a little bit harder because you don't have that same leverage, I guess, but if you do in an upwards or downwards pattern, then you're going to get this nice ripped edge like how you can see on my screen here. This is the one where it is a little bit too dry, so it was left a little bit too long under the hairdryer and I had a bit of a tough time ripping it off. You can rip however much off that you'd like. Sometimes I like to use a ruler to get a little bit more of a straighter edge, but it is absolutely not necessary. And I do like to keep some straight edges in there as well. It gives it a little bit more authenticity. Then I go back in with my tea bag. It does rip here in a minute, so I go and use the second one because it doesn't really add any texture. It just brushes off at the end when the tea leaves get on the paper. Another thing I like to do is, instead of using the rice method, which I see a lot online, is I use my tea to map out where my land masses are going to go. So if I have a little bit of extra staining in some areas, then I can use that for where I'm going to put the borders of my land or my coastlines. So then you go in with a pencil, or I certainly do because I don't want to mess up, and if I want to erase something, I want to have the option. And I start putting in the essentials. I trace the outlines of where my coastline is going to be, and I add in where I'm going to put the name, so I'm always going to put in a banner. I will show you these things closer up when I go in with my liner, but I'm just showing you that I'm roughly mapping out in pencil where I want things to go. So here I am going in with the liner first with the coastline, and it's good to have kind of a jittery hand in this. You don't want a really smooth coastline, you want it to be rugged, you want it to be a little bit messy, and just go where you feel like you want to go. Just let your hand be free, and you'll create this really cool coastline without the use of rice, because I don't want to use rice. It gets everywhere. How difficult is that to clean up? I see that method all the time and I just can't help but think, oh my gosh, that would be so messy. So then I go in with these little tiny marks that don't really make too much of an impact, but they look cool. So they're pretty much just little dashes along the coastline to make it look a little bit more like land, I guess. I don't know. I don't really understand why I do this. I just think it looks cooler and makes it look a little bit more like a map, I guess. Then of course you're going to go in with your water, so make sure you're doing this on the correct side of your coastline. And I just do little wavy lines. I do several layers of these, so I think I do altogether about 3, and each layer, I guess is what I'm going to call it, is going to be kind of less and less ripples coming out from the coastline. Every map, of course, needs a compass, so I will show you how I draw my compasses. It is the easiest version in my brain, so I don't really use a ruler, I just completely wing it. It's just a cross with another cross, and then I shade it in to make it look three-dimensional. I'm switching between a 04 and a 005 Micron pen for all of these. So for the bigger pieces like this and the compass and the coastline, I'm using my 04. And then for all of the smaller details, I'm going in with a 005. Give your map a name, of course, every land needs a name. I just went with something really generic and went with starry peaks. I did mountains on the side of it to give a little bit of a decorative edge to it. I've done this on pretty much all of the maps that I've made so far. Whatever the theme of the map is, I've put this kind of a border on it, I guess, and it just adds a little something extra, I feel, to the fantasy vibes of the map. And it's not something I've ever really seen done before, so add something that you like. I've added mountains on this one, I've added a tree on one of them, and I will show you at the end the other ones that I've done. So because I mapped these all in with pencil, I'm just going over and lining them all. It was just much easier to show you in the line art than it was in the pencil, because the pencil is kind of light and hard to see on the camera. Honestly, one of the hardest things about doing maps was coming up with names of places. You don't have to do this, but I really like adding in my little calligraphy writing. I always do these first, so then I can add all of the aspects around the name, and I kind of leave little breaks in the land masses or the houses that I've got around that name. So it kind of looks like it's in front of it, but it's not too intrusive. Also, don't do what I did, and if you add a little river or something coming from a lake into the sea, leave a gap, because I completely forgot to when I was doing my coastline. But just be aware of that. If you are adding a river that has an opening, then you might want to leave an opening in your coastline too. Whilst I can't help you with names of places, I can help you with the aspects that you can put on your map. So I'll leave a little basic cheat sheet in the description box below of somewhere that you can go to get inspiration for places and structures that you can put on your maps. When I first started, I went to Pinterest, so that is another great tool to use. Just type in fantasy maps and it will come up with a whole bunch of things. And of course, if you want the entire experience of what happens in my brain when I'm making a map, I do now have a map pack on Procreate that you can buy and download off of Ko-fi and Etsy. I'm super excited to release this to you guys, and it has all of the aspects I can possibly think of to put onto a map. So if you have Procreate and you are interested in downloading my map pack, then it can give you inspiration for your traditional maps as well if you wanted to see all of the things that I could possibly think of. Again, I will leave that link in the description box below if you wanted to buy my map pack. I have put a whole bunch of essentials on the map that I'm showing you right now on the screen, so it's good to have things like rocks and trees, houses, villages. You can have a cliff face like what I've done here. I have named my cliff faces in the past, so I've named one of them Starfall Ridge, which was really cool. I think that was a name that someone came up with in my stream when I did it on Twitch the first time. Mountains are always really fun to put in. I love drawing mountains. And then you can have kind of like specialized places. So for example, this willow tree is the feature of the island. So I've named the island after the willow tree. Obviously, caves are really cool to put in there. They add just like, just this kind of fantasy cool feature, and anything that your brain can think of. I found that when I was making maps, I started off using inspiration from Pinterest, and then my brain just went wild and it thought, okay, what if I can make this? What if I can make that? How would this look like if I was doing it in a line art on a map? And I just went from there. So I feel like I really want to be able to share that knowledge. That's why I created the ultimate brush pack over on Procreate that you can download and use. And as I said before, that basic little cheat sheet I will put a link for in the description too, for those of you who don't have Procreate and just need the basic inspiration to get you started. So I'll also add that I do typically like to do my map aspects a little bit smaller than what I'm showing you here. It's just to show you the types of things that you can put on the map, and so you can see it a little bit better on the camera. But yes, I would typically do things a lot smaller so I can fit a whole bunch more in. But I didn't have too much time to finish this one. The other ones I've spent many hours on, so they are a lot more detailed and a lot smaller. So I do have an entire universe over on Discord, and I made a map for each planet that I have there. There are 5 different planets. We've got Melopia, we've got Uwu, we've got Palkius, we've got Bastion, and we've got Galactifrey. And all of them have a different vibe, a different aesthetic, so I matched the map to their own aesthetics. If you wanted more information about each of my planets, then you can hop over into my Discord and check it out. But now we're going to be moving over to the digital version, so I'm going to be giving you a tutorial on how to use my map pack that you can get from Ko-fi or Etsy. So open up Procreate, make sure you have my map pack brushes downloaded and installed onto your Procreate. I just created a new canvas using the screen size, and I changed the background color to the same kind of tea vibes, a very light brown. And then I've selected my paper texture brush and a little bit of a darker color than what I use for the background. And on my first layer, I'm going to start just using my brush all over the paper so it brings out that paper texture. Then you're going to want to create a new layer and select my tea staining brush. So go over to a bit of a darker color and start tea staining the corners, much like how I did with the traditional method in the first segment of this video. I did mention earlier that I like to use the tea staining as my kind of guide for where I have my land masses, but in digital it is a little bit different, and I actually have added a mess-free rice brush for you guys so you can use the rice method without making a mess on your desk, because that is something that I absolutely don't want to do, so I always use the tea method. But select your rice brush and make it a lighter color and just start putting it all over your canvas as if you were, you know, spilling the tea, spilling the rice. I don't know. You're not doing it with any mess though, so that's a bonus. And then again, make another layer, go to your coastline brush, make it black, and start from the top if you're doing the coastline on the left-hand side. If you're doing it on the right-hand side, then start from the bottom. That's how the brush works. And trace around where you've got that rice. Make sure this is a separate layer because you want to be able to remove your rice when you're done, and then hide that layer or delete that layer of rice. And then you have a really cool coastline without really having to do much work. From here, then you can start exploring all of the stamps that I have. So I do have the essentials like the compass, I have some banners, I have actually added things from filming this video to making the voiceover. I've added things in between those two tasks, and I have a whole bunch more things in that brush pack for you to explore other than what you see here. So just start dropping in things wherever you want, make new layers whenever you need to. I usually, if I'm going to have something that's overlapping, I will put another layer in so I can erase what's behind it, and then yeah, just add whatever you need to. If you wanted to add something like a little river, I'm just using the monoline brush that comes with Procreate, and you know, just drawing it in as if I was, you know, drawing something on my canvas anyway. And then the rest of it, I'm just using the stamps and adding what I need to. So here's a good reason why you might want to use different layers, is because I was able to erase the mouth of the river. So if you remember in the first segment where I accidentally covered over where the mouth of my river was with my coastline, I was just able to erase it on this one. Making maps like this is a really good way to visualize if you're playing something like D&D or other tabletop games, or you just want to create your fantasy world in a really easy way. This digital version is a really quick and cool way to be able to do it. It took me like half the time of doing the traditional version, or even if you're using it in order to visualize how your traditional version is going to look, it's a really, really cool way. So I was so excited to be able to make this for you guys. So I hope you had fun, and I hope that you learned something new from this method, and I hope that you try it out as well. If you wanted to show me your works, then please go to my Discord and post it in the Artist Alley over there, or you can tag me on Instagram over at galacticat93. And don't forget, I do have those digital map packs over on my Ko-fi and my Etsy if you are interested. So make sure that if you use those, then please, please, please show me. I'm so excited to share that with you. I've been working on it for so long, and I really, really want people to utilize it and get as much out of it as they possibly can. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate you guys, and until the next video, fare thee well, everyone. Mwah. Bye. Making sure that I'm not on mute this time. Okay, I think I'm good.